Woman of 18 years old. Shy takes a breast exam. Shocks her doctor, an Arab executive, and he falls in love. No one expected that a simple medical exam would change two lives forever. She was young, shy, and engaged to a man she wasn't sure she loved. He was powerful, wealthy, and had built a wall around his heart. But that day, in the pristine luxury of a private clinic, their worlds collided in a way neither of them could have predicted. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an incredible story like this one. This helps us bring you more powerful and emotional stories filled with love, fate, and unexpected twists. Now, let's dive into a story of forbidden love, unexpected passion, and a decision that will change everything. The cool air of the luxurious private clinic carried the sterile scent of disinfectants and fresh linens. A gentle hush filled the hallways, disturbed only by the occasional murmur of nurses and the soft shuffle of expensive leather shoes against the polished marble floor. This was not an ordinary hospital. It was an exclusive medical facility catering to the world's elite, a place where discretion was as valued as expertise. Sophia sat in the waiting area, clutching the strap of her purse tightly. She could hear her own heartbeat, a steady, nervous drum against her ribs. At 18, she had always been shy, but today, the weight of her situation felt heavier than ever. The appointment had been her fiancé's idea. Adrian, a man 10 years her senior, who insisted on routine medical checkups, as if she were a fragile doll that needed constant maintenance. She had never questioned his authority over her life, not until now. She shifted in her chair, her gaze falling on the frosted glass door before her. The golden plaque beside it read, Dr. Khalil Al-Rashid, Chief of Diagnostic Medicine. The name alone sent a shiver down her spine. Dr. Khalil was not just a physician, he was an enigma. Known for his unrivaled skill in his field, he was also one of the wealthiest men in the country. Beyond his white coat, he was an executive, a billionaire whose influence extended far beyond the walls of this clinic. Yet, he chose to practice medicine, dedicating his time to patients despite his unimaginable fortune. A nurse appeared, her expression calm and professional. Miss Sophia, Dr. Al-Rashid is ready for you. Taking a deep breath, Sophia stood, smoothing her dress before following the nurse inside. The consultation room was vast, lined with bookshelves and sleek medical equipment. The large floor-to-ceiling window allowed warm afternoon light to pour in, casting a golden glow over the figure standing near the desk. Dr. Khalil Al-Rashid turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers the moment she entered. Sophia felt her breath catch. He was tall, strikingly handsome, with an air of quiet authority. His sharp jawline, neatly trimmed beard, and deep-set eyes carried an intensity that made her pulse quicken. He wasn't just intimidating, he was magnetic. There was a presence about him, a quiet confidence that seemed to pull her in. Miss Sophia, he greeted, his voice deep and rich. He gestured toward the examination chair. "Please, have a seat." She obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she climbed onto the cushioned seat. "First time getting this type of examination?" he asked, his tone softened with understanding. She nodded quickly. "Yes, I—" She hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish for being so nervous. I don't usually go to doctors." His lips curved slightly. "That's not uncommon. Many young women avoid medical checkups, but it's important to take care of yourself." She expected him to be cold, detached, like most doctors she had encountered. Instead, there was something unexpectedly warm in his gaze, an attentiveness that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. "Your fiancé scheduled this for you?" he asked, glancing at her file. She stiffened at the mention of Adrian. "Yes, he likes to make sure I'm healthy." Dr. Khalil's expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted, an unreadable flicker that made her stomach twist. He nodded, stepping closer, his hands adjusting his gloves with practiced precision. "All right, Sophia," he said gently. "I'll begin now. Just relax." She tried, but it was impossible. The second his hands made contact with her skin, clinical, professional, yet undeniably warm, her body tensed involuntarily. She told herself it was just nerves, just the discomfort of being examined. But deep down, she knew it was something else entirely. Her heart pounded, her breathing uneven as his fingers pressed lightly against her ribcage, moving with precise care. He was thorough, methodical, yet there was a moment, a fleeting second, when his touch lingered just a little too long. Or maybe she imagined it. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. Why did he make her feel this way? And why did she get the overwhelming sense that he felt it too? As the examination continued, Khalil's jaw tightened. He had done thousands of these exams before, each one a routine, clinical procedure. But this time, something was different. Something was dangerously distracting. He wasn't supposed to notice the way her breath hitched when he touched her. He wasn't supposed to feel this sudden, inexplicable pull toward her. She was young, engaged, off limits. And yet, when he met her gaze again, he knew. This moment was the beginning of something neither of them could ignore. The air in the examination room felt heavier than before. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly adjusted her dress, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled deep inside her. She had never felt this way before, this warmth, this awareness. Dr. Khalil al-Rashid removed his gloves with slow, precise movements, his dark eyes fixed on her for a second longer than necessary before he turned to jot something down in her file. "You're in perfect health," he finally said, his voice smooth yet unreadable. "There's nothing to worry about." Sophia nodded, relieved, but also inexplicably disappointed. She didn't know what she had expected, what she had hoped for, but something about the way he looked at her made her feel like this appointment had meant more than just a simple medical checkup. She stood, smoothing out the folds of her dress. "Thank you, Dr. Al-Rashid." His gaze lingered on her for a moment, something unreadable flickering in his expression before he spoke again. "Call me Khalil," he said, his voice lower, softer. Her breath caught. It was inappropriate. She knew it. And he knew it too. Doctors never asked their patients to call them by their first names. But something about the way he said it sent a shiver through her. "Khalil," she echoed, the name unfamiliar yet strangely intimate on her tongue. A small smile ghosted across his lips, but it disappeared just as quickly. He was composed, restrained, yet something about his demeanor had shifted. The man before her was not just a doctor, he was something else entirely. "I assume your fiancé will be pleased with the results," he said after a pause, his tone measured. Sophia stiffened, a sudden wave of discomfort washing over her. Adrian. She had almost forgotten about him for a moment. The guilt clawed at her chest, but there was also something else, something deeper. Would Adrian have noticed the way Khalil looked at her? Would he have sensed this strange pull between them? She forced a small smile. "Yes, he's very careful when it comes to my health." Khalil's jaw tightened just slightly, so subtly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Sophia did. "Of course," he said, his tone neutral. She didn't know why, but she suddenly wanted to explain, to tell him that her engagement wasn't what it seemed, that Adrian wasn't the love of her life, that she didn't even know what love was supposed to feel like. Instead, she simply nodded, hesitating for a second too long before heading toward the door. Just as she reached for the handle, his voice stopped her. "Sophia." Her fingers froze on the door, and she turned slowly. Khalil was watching her, his expression carefully guarded, but his eyes told another story. "If you ever need anything," he said, "you can always reach out to me." It was such a simple statement, and yet it wasn't simple at all. There was a weight behind those words, a silent understanding that neither of them dared to acknowledge. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded again before slipping out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, she exhaled shakily. What had just happened? Her entire body was still buzzing, her skin tingling where his hands had been. It was ridiculous. He was a doctor, and she was a patient. Nothing had happened. Nothing should have happened. And yet, she knew. Something had shifted. Something had begun. And no matter how hard she tried, She wouldn't be able to ignore it. The drive home was quiet, but inside Sophia's mind, a storm raged. She sat in the back seat of Adrian's black luxury car, her hands resting on her lap as she stared out the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, but all she could see was him, Khalil. She could still hear his voice, feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken tension that had filled the room. It made no sense. He was just a doctor, and she was just another patient. But then why did she feel like something irreversible had just happened? Next to her, Adrian tapped on his phone, barely acknowledging her presence. His suit was pristine, his cologne expensive, but there was something cold about him. He was the kind of man who looked perfect on paper, wealthy, responsible, respected. Her family adored him. He was the right choice. But Sophia had never felt this way around him. She had never lost her breath, never felt like her heart was about to break free from her chest. "Everything went well, I assume?" Adrian finally asked, not looking up from his phone. "Yes," Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, uninterested, before typing another message. It was always like this with Adrian, polite, distant, predictable. She used to think that was what love looked like: comfort, stability, routine. But now she wasn't so sure. She pressed her fingers against her temple, trying to push away the intrusive thoughts. It was nothing, just a brief moment of foolishness. She would never see Dr. Khalil again, and soon this would all be forgotten. Except it wasn't forgotten. Not that night. Not even days later. Because Khalil wasn't just a fleeting thought. He had become a lingering presence in her mind, a name that echoed every time she closed her eyes. And then, fate intervened. 3 days later, Sophia found herself standing outside the luxury shopping mall where Adrian had asked her to meet him. The marble floors gleamed under the bright chandelier lights, and the soft hum of wealthy patrons filled the air. Adrian was late, again. She sighed, checking her phone, scrolling through unread messages. It wasn't unusual for him to get caught up in work, but lately it felt like she was more of an accessory to his life than a priority. A movement in the distance caught her eye, and she turned toward the high-end cafe near the mall's entrance. And that's when her heart stopped. Sitting at a table, casually stirring a cup of coffee, was Khalil. He wasn't wearing his white coat this time. Instead, he was dressed in an elegant dark suit, his tie slightly loosened, his posture relaxed yet commanding. He looked less like a doctor and more like the billionaire that he was, sophisticated, effortlessly powerful. Sophia's breath hitched. She should walk away. She should pretend she hadn't seen him. But her feet refused to move, and then, as if sensing her presence, he looked up. Their eyes met. Time froze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. There was something electric in the air, something unspoken yet undeniable. Khalil's gaze flickered with something she couldn't decipher. Curiosity, amusement, something deeper. Slowly, he set down his cup, tilting his head ever so slightly. An invitation. Her heart pounded. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. But her body moved before her mind could catch up. One step, then another, and suddenly she was standing in front of him. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant it for herself or for him. Khalil's lips curved slightly, the hint of a smile playing at the edges. "Neither should you." She swallowed hard. "I was just waiting for your fiancé," he finished for her, his voice smooth, measured. She nodded. His eyes studied her carefully, as if searching for something. "And yet, you came to me first." Her stomach twisted. He was right, and the realization made her dizzy. She should leave. She should run. But all she could do was stand there, trapped in the intensity of his gaze, knowing that this, whatever this was far from over. Sophia's pulse pounded so loudly in her ears that she barely heard the soft clink of Khalil's spoon against his porcelain cup. She knew she should turn around, walk away, pretend this moment had never happened. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there, staring at the man who had unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. "Would you like to sit?" Khalil's voice was deep, smooth, controlled. But there was something else in his tone, something that sent a shiver down her spine. "I shouldn't," she whispered. He nodded, as if he understood. "But you want to." Her breath caught. How did he see through her so easily? Before she could stop herself, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. It was reckless, foolish, and yet it felt inevitable. Khalil studied her with those dark, piercing eyes, as if he were trying to decipher the mystery of her presence. His posture remained composed, but his gaze told a different story, one of curiosity, of restraint, of something she didn't dare name. "I have to admit," he said, leaning slightly forward, "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "Neither was I," she admitted, forcing a small smile. "And yet, here we are." The words hung between them, unspoken, yet understood. She lowered her gaze, tracing the delicate rim of her water glass. "This is just a coincidence." "Perhaps." Khalil tilted his head, as if contemplating the idea. "Or perhaps some things are meant to happen." Sophia exhaled sharply. This wasn't right. She was engaged. She had no business sitting across from a man who made her feel like the ground beneath her feet was shifting. And yet, she couldn't make herself leave. "You intrigue me, Sophia," Khalil admitted, his voice quiet but firm. She swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, as if weighing his words carefully. Because you don't belong to this world. She frowned. What do you mean? Khalil's lips curled slightly, but his expression remained serious. This world of wealth, of power, of cold, calculated decisions. You're different. Sophia felt her heart tighten. Adrian had always told her she needed to adapt, to learn how to carry herself in the elite circles he lived in. But Khalil, he was looking at her as if her differences weren't flaws, but something rare. And yet, she murmured, I'm engaged to a man who does belong to this world. Khalil's jaw tightened. Tell me, do you love him? The question hit her like a blow. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Love. She had never questioned it before. She had always assumed that love wasn't supposed to be felt intensely, that it was simply a commitment, a decision to build a life together. But now, as she sat across from a man who made her feel like she was standing at the edge of something dangerous and thrilling, she realized she had no idea what love really was. Khalil exhaled, leaning back. You hesitated. She looked away, heat rising to her cheeks. It's complicated. No, Sophia, he said softly, yet with certainty. It's really not. She felt exposed, as if he had peeled away every layer she had carefully built around herself. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Adrian. Her stomach twisted as she stared at the screen. Khalil watched her, his expression unreadable. It's him, isn't it? She nodded. You should answer, he said. But there was something in his tone, something that told her he didn't want her to. She hesitated for just a moment longer before pressing the call button. Where are you? Adrian's voice was sharp, impatient. Sophia's fingers tightened around the phone. I'm at the cafe by the entrance. I told you to wait inside the mall, he interrupted. I don't have time to look for you. Sophia flinched at the coldness in his tone. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Khalil's jaw clench. I'll come to you, she murmured. Good. Adrian hung up without another word. She lowered the phone, feeling strangely hollow. Khalil watched her carefully. Does he always speak to you like that? It's nothing, she said quickly, standing up. I should go. Sophia. His voice was low, firm. She paused. You deserve more than nothing. She turned to face him, her chest tightening. This was dangerous. This was wrong. So why did it feel like the most real moment of her life? Without another word, she turned and walked away. But as she stepped back into Adrian's world, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the last time she would see Khalil. Sophia's heels clicked against the polished marble floors of the mall as she hurried toward Adrian. Her mind was spinning, her heart still racing from the conversation she had just had with Khalil. Every word, every glance, every lingering moment replayed in her head. She felt as if she had just walked away from something dangerous, something she had no business feeling. And yet, she couldn't deny the truth. She had wanted to stay. Adrian stood near the entrance of a designer boutique, his suit immaculate, his phone still in his hand. When he saw her approaching, his expression barely shifted. No warmth, no relief, just an expectant look, as if she were merely an obligation he was tending to. "You took your time," he muttered, slipping his phone into his pocket. Sophia forced a smile. "I got distracted." Adrian barely acknowledged her response before gesturing toward the store. "Come, I need you to try on a dress for the gala next weekend." She followed him inside, the scent of expensive perfumes filling the air. The boutique was nearly empty, designed for exclusive clientele like Adrian. Sales associates hovered at a distance, ready to serve but careful not to intrude. Sophia barely paid attention as Adrian spoke to one of them, listing details about what he wanted her to wear. He had always been like this, choosing things for her, making decisions as if she were a doll he could dress up and place at his side. It had never bothered her before. But today, it did. Today she could still hear Khalil's voice in her head. "You deserve more than nothing." A lump formed in her throat as the saleswoman guided her toward the fitting room, placing an elegant navy blue gown in her hands. "Try this one first," she said with a polite smile before stepping away. Sophia exhaled slowly and slipped into the dressing room, closing the door behind her. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, running her hands over the delicate fabric. It was beautiful, elegant, perfect, just like everything Adrian wanted her to be. She should be happy. She should feel lucky. Then why did she feel so lost? Her phone buzzed. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. Unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Her fingers trembled slightly as she answered. "Hello?" There was silence for a moment. And then, "I shouldn't be calling you." Sophia's breath caught. "Khalil." She gripped the phone tighter, her pulse racing. "Then why are you?" Another pause. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." Her entire body tensed. The confession sent a shiver down her spine, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice lower, rougher. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this is a mistake." She should. She should tell him to stop. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know if I can." A sharp breath on the other end. The tension between them was thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. "Sophia," he said again, softer this time. "Meet me." Her heart pounded. This was a mistake. A terrible, reckless mistake. And yet the words left her lips before she could stop them. Where? The moment she agreed, a shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't her. She didn't do things like this. But as she left the boutique, Adrian barely glanced at her, too absorbed in a phone call about business deals. And suddenly, she knew. He would never notice her absence. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the sleek black car that had been waiting for her. She had given Khalil no time, no place, and yet he had already sent a driver. The realization sent a rush through her, something foreign, something thrilling. The car pulled up to a private entrance of a 5-star hotel, and her breath hitched. This was insane. She should turn back. But the moment she stepped out, Khalil was there. He wasn't in a white coat now. He wasn't her doctor. He was just a man who looked at her as if she were something he wasn't supposed to have. "This is wrong," she whispered, but she didn't move away when he stepped closer. "Then tell me to leave." His voice was low, his gaze burning into hers. She couldn't. The next moment, his lips were on hers, and Sophia knew there was no turning back. Days passed, but Sophia was no longer the same. She carried the memory of that night like a secret flame, hidden beneath layers of guilt and longing. Adrian didn't notice, but Khalil did. Every glance, every stolen second they shared when no one was watching, only pulled her deeper. She knew this couldn't last. She knew it would destroy everything. Yet, when Khalil whispered, "Run away with me," she almost said yes. Almost, until Adrian found out. The confrontation was brutal. Adrian's face was unreadable as he set her phone on the table. The messages from Khalil laid bare. "I should have known," he said coldly. "You were never made for this life." Sophia's chest ached, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He simply walked away. And for the first time in her life, Sophia felt free. The airport was quiet in the late hours of the night. Sophia's hands trembled as she clutched her passport, her heart pounding with every passing second. Would he come? She had no way of knowing. Then a voice, deep, familiar, filled with promise. "Sophia." She turned, and there he was. No hesitation, no fear, just love. And just like that, she chose him.